What if the most brutal truth about Brooklyn Beckham wasn't said out loud? What if it didn't need to be? Because this time, David Beckham didn't yell. He didn't clap back. He didn't defend his son on talk shows or rush out a sympathy interview. He did something far colder. He stayed silent. And in the Beckham universe, silence isn't weakness, it's a verdict. For years, Brooklyn Beckham has chased identity after identity. Football, photography, cooking, branding, reinvention after reinvention, all announced as the one. And yet, nothing sticks. No lane held. No craft mastered. No proof that the name on the door isn't doing most of the work. So when Brooklyn finally framed his family distance as independence, the internet applauded. But behind the applause, one question kept growing louder. Independence, from what exactly? Because while Brooklyn talks about freedom, David Beckham's recent words, carefully chosen, painfully calm, point to something else entirely. Responsibility, discipline, consequences. And suddenly, the story flips. What if this isn't a family feud? What if this is a father quietly stepping back and letting reality step in? Because when the world stops protecting you, that's when the truth gets loud. And this time, it's deafening. The silence didn't come overnight. It was gradual, calculated, almost surgical. David Beckham didn't wake up one morning and decide to distance himself from his eldest son. This wasn't rage. This wasn't punishment. This was something far more unsettling. Acceptance. The kind that happens when disappointment has been repeated so many times, it stops hurting and starts clarifying. Behind closed doors, the conversations had already happened. The advice had already been given. The chances had already been extended. Again, and again, and again. What the public is witnessing now isn't the beginning of a conflict. It's the end of patience. Because for years, Brooklyn Beckham has lived in a bubble most people will never experience. A last name that opens doors. A phone call that erases waiting lists. A safety net so thick that failure never truly lands. And yet, despite all of that, the pattern never changes. Start strong. Get attention. Quit quietly. Football was supposed to be destiny. Elite academies. Private coaching. Access most kids would give anything for. But when discipline met expectation, the story stalled. No breakthrough. No professional contract. Just a quiet exit and a rebrand. Then came photography glossy shoots. Fashion houses. A book deal. Applause arrived instantly. So did skepticism. And just as quickly as it began, it ended. No long-term growth. No evolution. Just another lane abandoned when the grind stopped feeling glamorous. Cooking followed. Viral clips. High-budget shows. Platforms most trained chefs spend decades chasing. Brooklyn admitted he had no formal training. No background. No experience. But the branding pushed forward anyway. Critics laughed. The internet mocked. And once again, instead of proving them wrong, Brooklyn disappeared. This is where David Beckham's worldview becomes impossible to ignore. This is a man who was booed by his own country, humiliated on the world stage, blamed for national heartbreak. And his response was never to pivot careers or blame narratives. It was to train harder, work longer, return stronger. So when David talks about learning through mistakes, it's not empty parenting language. It's philosophy. Mistakes are acceptable, quitting is not. And that's the tension ripping through this family right now. Because while Brooklyn frames his distance as independence, the optics tell a different story. He hasn't stepped away to build something concrete. There's no long-term project. No defined career path. No evidence of commitment. Just emotional separation paired with continued comfort. That contradiction hasn't gone unnoticed. Instead of defending Brooklyn publicly, David and Victoria did something quietly devastating. They shifted focus. They amplified the children who stayed. Romeo, walking major runways, season after season. Cruz, committing to music, writing, performing, touring, slowly building credibility without spectacle. Those weren't accidental posts. Those weren't random proud parent moments. Those were signals. In the Beckham household, effort is currency. And Brooklyn knows it. That's why his frustration didn't stay private. It went public. Accusations about control, about narratives, about image. But the more he spoke, the more the contrast sharpened. Because image without substance collapses fast when no one rushes to protect it. David could have ended this with one interview. One quote, one emotional soundbite. But he didn't. And that restraint speaks louder than any denial. Because when a father stops intervening, it's rarely because he doesn't care. It's because he believes reality needs to take over. And that's the uncomfortable truth sitting beneath this entire situation. This isn't about favoritism. It's about follow-through. This isn't about love being withdrawn. It's about respect being conditional. And right now, Brooklyn Beckham is discovering something his last name shielded him from for years. Access can open doors. Privilege can soften landings. But neither can replace discipline. And once protection fades, only results speak. What makes this moment truly volatile isn't what's being said publicly. It's what's being whispered behind the scenes. Because according to people close to the Beckham circle, the frustration didn't explode suddenly. It built quietly, over years of false starts and reinventions. Each time Brooklyn announced a new passion, the family showed up. Each time he stepped away, they reset expectations. And each time, the safety net was there, softer than the last. Until it wasn't. Sources familiar with the situation describe a growing concern that Brooklyn's lifestyle no longer matched his output. Lavish homes, designer wardrobes, high-end travel, expensive projects launched with cinematic polish. But behind the visuals, there was little infrastructure. No team built for longevity. No long-term strategy. No proof that the work could survive without constant visibility. And that's where the tension sharpened. Because David Beckham doesn't just understand fame, he understands what happens when it fades. He's watched athletes burn out. He's seen stars crash when the cameras move on. He knows that image without discipline eventually collapses under its own weight. So when Brooklyn framed his family distance as a fight against control, insiders say the reaction wasn't anger. It was disbelief. Because from the family's perspective, nothing was being taken away. Expectations were simply being raised. And Brooklyn wasn't meeting them. Public reaction didn't help. Online, the narrative split sharply. Some praised Brooklyn for choosing peace. Others weren't convinced. Comment sections filled with the same uncomfortable question: what exactly has he built that stands on its own? Critics pointed to the pattern. Football ended quietly. Photography fizzled. Cooking stalled. Branding drifted. Each pivot came with hype. Each exit came without explanation. And every time, the reset button worked because the Beckham name absorbed the impact. But that buffer appears to be thinning. Instead of correcting the record or offering public reassurance, David and Victoria doubled down on visibility elsewhere. Fashion Week appearances. Career milestones. Subtle praise aimed squarely at consistency and effort. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The message was unmistakable. In this family, momentum matters. Then came the comments that shifted everything. David, speaking generally about parenting, emphasized accountability. Education. Learning the hard way. He didn't deny anyone's feelings. He didn't point fingers. But he also didn't excuse outcomes. That framing was brutal in its simplicity. Mistakes are allowed. But insulation is not guaranteed. And suddenly, the spotlight swung back to a question no one had asked loudly enough. What happens if the scaffolding disappears? Brooklyn's current stability is deeply intertwined with his marriage. Socially, emotionally, financially. His wife comes from extraordinary wealth and influence. A safety net that rivals even the Beckham empire. And while love can be grounding, critics argue dependence disguised as independence is a dangerous illusion. If that relationship changes, what remains? That's not gossip. That's logistics. And it's the kind of question David Beckham has spent his life preparing for. He built relevance that outlived playing days. He created systems that didn't collapse when one chapter ended. He failed publicly and rebuilt privately. Brooklyn, by contrast, is still searching for a structure that isn't inherited or borrowed. Which is why this silence feels so deliberate. So strategic. So final. Because when the people who once protected you step back, it's not cruelty. It's a test. And right now, the world is watching to see whether Brooklyn Beckham finally passes it, or proves every doubt right. What makes this situation impossible to smooth over is that time is no longer on Brooklyn's side. The internet doesn't forget patterns. And right now, the pattern is louder than any statement he could release. Every pivot, every rebrand, every announcement framed as a new chapter now gets measured against one brutal question. How long until this one is abandoned too? That's the cost of restarting too often. And David Beckham understands that cost better than anyone. His entire legacy was forged under pressure. He didn't get softer standards because of fame. He got harsher ones. Booed in stadiums. Blamed for national humiliation. Mocked relentlessly. And instead of retreating, he doubled down on structure. Training. Discipline. Repetition. The unglamorous work no camera lingers on. That's the lens through which this entire conflict makes sense. Brooklyn isn't being judged for failing. He's being judged for failing to stay. Staying when criticism hits. Staying when novelty fades. Staying when applause turns into silence. And that's why this moment feels less like a family dispute and more like a reckoning. Because the shield that once softened consequences appears to be gone. No dramatic defense. No emergency PR tour. No narrative rescue. Just space. And space can be terrifying when you're not sure what you're standing on. The contrast with Romeo and Cruz has only sharpened the message. They didn't just pick lanes, they remained in them. Fashion didn't become a side quest. Music didn't become a hobby. They showed up when no one was clapping. They absorbed criticism instead of escaping it. And slowly, credibility followed. That's why public praise for them feels intentional. It isn't celebration, it's reinforcement. This is what commitment looks like. Brooklyn, meanwhile, is left confronting an uncomfortable reality. Independence isn't distance. It's infrastructure. It's having something that survives when relationships shift, when names stop opening doors, when protection fades. And that's where the silence cuts deepest. Because David Beckham didn't close the door. He simply stopped holding it open. That choice reframes everything Brooklyn said. What sounded like rebellion now looks like impatience. What felt like empowerment now looks like avoidance. And what was framed as emotional freedom now invites a harsher interpretation. Was this about escaping control or escaping accountability? The public may never hear a direct answer. The Beckhams don't operate that way. They let outcomes speak. They let consistency prove loyalty. They let time do the talking. And time is unforgiving. Brooklyn can still rewrite this story. That's the part no one denies. But the rewrite won't come from interviews, captions, or symbolic distance. It will come from choosing one thing and enduring it long enough to earn respect without borrowed credibility. Until then, the narrative won't soften. Because in a family built on discipline, effort isn't optional. And in a world obsessed with reinvention, the rarest skill isn't talent. It's follow-through. And that's the truth no one needed to say out loud. Because the silence already did. So now the question is yours. Was David Beckham being cold? Or was he being honest? Was this silence a punishment? Or the final lesson? Because if independence has to be announced, was it ever real to begin with? And if privilege keeps catching you every time you fall, did you really stand on your own? Or were you just insulated? Drop your thoughts below. Is Brooklyn being unfairly judged? Or is this exactly what accountability looks like when the safety net disappears? And here's the real question no one wants to answer. If the Beckham name stopped opening doors tomorrow, what would still be standing? If this story made you uncomfortable, good. That means it hit something real. Like the video. Subscribe for more stories they won't explain this clearly. And turn on notifications, because the next chapter of this saga won't come with warnings. Silence is loud. And this one just got deafening.